Good morning, Winchester Public Library. Happy Monday. Thanks for joining me. I don't know how many of you I've got on right now, but we'll find out shortly. I hope everybody had a great weekend and enjoyed some sun. I actually went to a beach, I went on Friday, but that felt very strange and also kind of nice to just be outside. And there were a lot of people there. I'm not sure I will go back anytime soon, honestly. So thanks for joining me. I hope you enjoyed last week's discussion about reading your bookshelves, and I hope you've all started taking a look at your books and assessing how much you want to keep them and how many of them you want to still read. I am reading Atonement, and I'm enjoying it. I did not get through it this week like I was hoping to. I've been distracted by, I think, the world and all of the other things on my shelf, and I actually have a book waiting for me at the library now, which I'm going to go up and pick up today through contactless pickup. Very excited about that. Anyway, this week I want to talk to you about Reader's Advisory and what it is that we're doing when you come to the library and you visit one of the librarians, either in the children's department or upstairs in the reference department, and you say to us, I'm looking for something to read. And I don't really know what it is. I'm just looking for something. And I know that maybe it feels like we're doing some kind of librarian magic when we find a great book for you, but that's not really the case. We are doing something called Reader's Advisory, and every librarian learns how to do it in library school. Although I will say that it is it's a skill that's, I think, honed over years of librarianship. I'm a new librarian, and I'm just really getting interested and a little bit more confident in Reader's Advisory. We have some librarians at the Winchester Public Library who excel at this. I'm thinking particularly of Jenny. She's such a great resource for books, and the number one reason that she is that she is a huge reader, and that is why reading is essential. The more you read, the more you know, and the more people you talk to, and librarians especially, who tend to read probably more books than the average person just because of the exposure and the job, and that's the profession, will know a lot more books, will have read a lot more books to recommend to you. But today I wanted to talk a little bit about what happens and what process we go through when you come to us and ask for your next great read. When you purchase a book online, or maybe if you've even noticed at the library, when you look up on our catalog, you'll see a lot of, if you liked this, then you might like this. If people who purchased this book also liked this book, those kind of algorithms that are done by computer to sort of tag the style or author or genre of the book that you've selected, and automatically draws other titles that are like that book. We do use Novelist at the library and other tools as well. But that's a big one, because when you are looking up a book on the catalog on your own, you will find the title of your book on the catalog, and then if you scroll down, you'll see read-alike. Read-alikes by Novelist, and those are books that are similar, or that Novelist has decided through its algorithm are similar to the book that you're looking up. And then you'll also find authors who are similar to the author of the book that you looked up. And that's one way that we can often help you find books, especially when they're outside our particular area of expertise. You know, if there are genres that I don't read very much. So if I were the only person at the desk and someone wanted a book about a fantasy book, and I didn't have a colleague nearby who sort of more specializes in fantasy, then I might go to Novelist and ask you, look up by subject or author, but really I would try to find a friend to help me. But the best way to find your next great read, I think, comes through chatting with librarians, chatting with fellow readers, friends, people who recommend books, bookstore owners or staff, readers in general. That's why book clubs are fun, because often you find people whose reading approach or style or interest meets yours, and then you'll find that together you have a lot of shared books and shared interests, and it can be really fun to recommend books that way too. For us in the library world, one of the readers advisory gurus is a woman named Nancy Pearl. Nancy Pearl is she's a professor. She has worked in book retail. She's been a public librarian. She's based in Seattle, and she is an author of a series of books called Book Lust and Book Crush. She has a couple of others. She has a nonfiction book, I think it's called Lizzie and George, that she published. A fiction, but a novel. The other ones are nonfiction, and they're collated book lists, things that she's curated, best of lists, things you should read, and that's a great place to start. But Nancy, every library student who goes to library school, I think, has certainly heard of Nancy Pearl, and probably during the reader's advisory portion of a reference class had some kind of presentation by Nancy Pearl. So Nancy Pearl believes that when someone asks for help in finding their next book, what they're really asking for is to recreate the enjoyable experience they had when they read a book that they loved. And so our job as librarians is to discern what it is about a book that you loved that drew you into that book, and then try to find books that can draw you in a similar way. So instead of, if you came to me and you said, I'm looking for a book to read, and I said to you, what kind of books do you like? Do you like fiction? Do you like nonfiction? Do you like speculative fiction? Do you like memoir? That's not really a great question. A better question that I can ask you is, tell me about a book that you read that you've loved. And then you might tell me about a great book that you read, and I can say, what is it that you loved about that book? And then my job is to listen for the kind of words that you use when you're describing a book that you loved. I can also follow that up with, tell me about a book that really didn't work out for you, that you didn't like at all. And I can also be listening to how you respond to that question, and then we have a dialogue, and that's a great way to find a great book. So Nancy Pearl introduces the idea of 4 doorways in Reader's Advisory. She uses the analogy of doorways because a doorway is sort of like an entryway into a story. And she believes that books, and she is speaking specifically about fiction and narrative nonfiction, she believes that there are 4 general doorways to books. And these doors are story, characters, setting, and language. And I'm going to go through each of those 4 doorways and talk to you a little bit about what it means when those are the doorways that kind of speak to you or invite you into a book, and how you can identify that. And then at the end of our talk, I'm going to talk to you about a new service that the Winchester Public Library has. We have a new reading recommendations section on our website, which can help you have a hopefully great reader's advisory discussion with a librarian, which we can provide to you online right now through a form, and then perhaps a conversation, and we can select some good books for you, but I'll tell you about that at the end. All right, so moving on to story. When you have asked us what you should read next, and we have asked you, tell me about a book or 2 that you've really loved, we're listening for the ways that you describe the books. And story can also be thought of as plot, like maybe you like really story-driven books. Story-driven books are things that you might think of as, this is how you might describe them. You might say, I just like my last book, it was such a page turner. The story just drew me in. I couldn't put it down. I couldn't put it down at night. I was losing sleep. I got through it so quickly. Like that kind of book that just like pulls you right in, and you need to know what's happening next. That would be a really large doorway for a story-driven book. Some examples that I have, and I've pulled out examples of books only that I have read for this purpose, as opposed to books that I know to be plot driven. Like I would say an author like Stephen King has a very plot driven style, and Michael Crichton has a very plot driven style, but I haven't read all of those authors' books, so I'm just going to pull out some books that I identify with as being very story driven. And my personal reading style is very story driven and very character driven. Those are books that I'm drawn to. So my examples are Devil in the White City by Eric Larson, which is a great page turning story driven book. Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. I found that to be just a page turner. Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn is not my favorite book in the world, but I pretty much didn't put it down until it was over, because it's just one of those very fast-paced, quick, short chapter books that are very just driven by an intense storyline, suspenseful storyline. And then All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr, which is, for me, was a very story-driven book. It's also very character-driven, with two strong characters driving the, just sort of connecting and driving the story forward. But the actual details of the story, for me, what drew me in. There is also character is another doorway in which you can enter a book, and that can be something that is your preferred sort of like way to get into a book if a book has really strong characters. And when you describe books like this to us, we're listening for things like, oh, it was really intense family drama. There were so many interpersonal connections, and there was just so much emotional strife and tons of dialogue, and it was a coming-of-age story, things like that. Those are character-driven stories, tend to be language you would use around a character-driven book. So some examples of this from my reading. And what is interesting about this list, and I'll point it out now, often character-driven books are ones in which the character is named in the title, which I realized I've added 3 of these in a row, and I was thinking, oh, that's kind of obviously going to be a character-driven book. One is The World According to Garp by John Irving. I love this book, and super driven by the character of Garp and his antics. Olive Kittredge and Olive Again, both by Elizabeth Strout, are beautiful books about a sort of ornery woman with a very righteous sense of righteousness in her life and a very, very big heart, ultimately. Olive is truly the heart of the stories in the book, and I can't imagine the book with any other character but her. And Where'd You Go, Bernadette by Maria Semple is a great, funny book. Bernadette is a really wonderful character. And if you haven't read that one, I'd highly recommend it. It's backlisted. You probably be able to find it very easily, and I 100% don't recommend the movie, which maybe I shouldn't give my opinion, but that's my opinion. Some other character-driven books, one of my favorite books of all time is A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. It's a sorrowful book about 4 friends from college over the sort of course of their adult lives. It is a difficult book to read, but it is beautiful, and the friendships between the men in the book and their personal struggles, the characters are so rich, and they're so they become so beloved by the end of the book. And yeah, that's a really perfect character-driven book for me. And Pride and Prejudice is another one. I mean, I think it's the characters that make that book so wonderful and funny. And The Dutch House is another one that I had on my list by Anne Patchett. That was sort of a family story of a family and their struggles they face after their parents. I won't get into too much, but I don't want to give anything away, but it's a beautiful story. And the Dutch house is a house that the family moves to and then ultimately leaves, but keeps coming back to because they are so enamored with it. The Dutch house actually almost has this sense, you have a sense that it is a character in the book as well. It's a very beautiful book. Setting is the next doorway for entry into a book. And these books are often described as having great atmosphere, that they evoke the sense that you're there, that you're in them, that you can close your eyes and imagine the place, or you have a sense of having been there before. The life is in the location. And you can imagine many books like this. I have some on my list, but really I think any books that are set in a place that is truly otherworldly or different than your regular daily life, like a magical world, or a lot of fantasy. You know, I'm thinking of something like the George R.R. Knight books, which the name is escaping me right now. You know the books. So these are some of my examples. Into Thin Air and Into the Woods, both by Jon Krakauer, are great books that sort of just like take you right to the location. Into Thin Air, I thought this was a memoir of his experience on Everest in the 1996, I think, 94 and 95, 96 devastating season of Everest. It is a book that makes you feel the struggle of the mountain and really brings the setting to life. The Narnia series by C.S. Lewis is another one where I, as a child reading those books, I was transported to Narnia 100%. And that was what, on top of the probably the story-driven parts of the book, it was the land, it was the magic that really took me away. The Handmaid's Tale is one for me that I might work The Handmaid's Tale into every single book talk. I'm not sure. The Handmaid's Tale and Gilead, and that couldn't have, it didn't feel like that book could have worked in any other setting. It was such a perfect backdrop for the struggles of the handmaids and for what the families were going through. The Secret Garden is another one by Frances Hodgson Burnett, which I read as a child and an adult. And it's the garden is a place of it's pure, it transports you, it's imaginative, it's beautiful, it's something you can get lost in, it's mysterious, and I think that the setting makes that book beautiful. And the last one I have is The Shining, because I was thinking about things that maybe don't feel so great and how the setting of that book, for me reading it, I was also younger when I read that book and it really terrified me. But I started really imagining being in a hotel, a massive hotel in the woods where nobody else was there. And I think that Stephen King did a good job of sort of like bringing that hotel to life and making it part of the just part of the whole tone of terror and fear in the book. The last doorway that we go through when we are entering a book is language. And language is not my favorite doorway, which I discovered, and I kind of knew that already, but I discovered this as I was trying to list out books with language. So this doorway focuses not so much on the content of the story, but in the telling of the story. And books, when you're describing a book with a large language doorway and a book that you love, you might use the words, the book was poetic, it was lyrical, it was whimsical, it was witty, it was literary, it was leisurely, it took its time in the telling of the story, it used beautiful prose, those kind of books. So when we hear that, we're thinking what you liked about a book was quite possibly the language of the book. Some books that I've read that come to mind as having beautiful language is 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. That book was not for me. It's a good book. It's just very long and slow moving, and I think people get lost in the language and love it, and I think that maybe that happens with Cormac McCarthy books as well. Another one I have is this is a book that I absolutely loved, the Jhumpa Lahiri, The Lowland. It was a wonderful book about brothers, and she sets some beautiful, she speaks in beautiful metaphor, and I highly recommend that one, but I would say it's very strong in language, also very strong in setting. Ernest Hemingway, A Movable Feast, I think is one of his, I think Ernest Hemingway in general relies very strongly on language as his sort of the main part of his storytelling as opposed to his characters. Setting is always a big part too. I'm thinking mostly of A Movable Feast when I was talking about language, that's one that I identified as just being, it is poetic. He is descriptive. He's purposeful in his use of language, and he creates wonderful settings. So like I said, novelist is a way that we use, so just to cover those, because I want you to think of this in a different way too. So we have story, character, setting, and language. And we're thinking of those as 4 doorways. Another way that Nancy Pearl describes these is as a pie. So if you thought of like a pie chart, if you consider those 4 pieces of your book as pieces of pie, each with a quadrant, then you can imagine if you have a book that's very strong on story, that story might be a large piece of your pie. Maybe not so much on the language. That might have a smaller piece of your pie. Maybe it's got pretty great characters, so another maybe a little bit of a larger piece of your pie. And then the setting is not such a big deal. So you can imagine your book as a pie with those 4 pieces, and if you looked over your reading history and list out the books that you love, can you identify that generally you migrate toward one of those larger pieces of pie? Do you generally love books with strong characters? Do you generally love books where the setting takes you away? And once you can identify that in yourself, then it's easier to ask people who've done a lot of reading, like, I really like a strong character-driven book where people are funny and there's a lot of talking. The characters have some kind of transformation. That's a great conversation to have with a reader at a library or a bookshop or a friend in a book club. So this brings me to we have a few minutes left, and I want to talk about a new service that we've started in the last few weeks at the library. It's called Reading Recommendations. And if you go to our website at winpublib.org and you go under our services, you'll find a link to the Reading Recommendations page. And what we've created for you, I printed out a copy, which is not that helpful, but I'm just going to read from it a little bit. What we put together for you is sort of like it's a form that you fill out online, and it is a way for us to have this conversation, which we can't have right now because the library is not open. So we're trying to create for you a personalized reading recommendation based on information that you give us. And so these are the questions we're asking. Tell us a few books or authors that you've liked or enjoyed and what made these books great. So that's exactly what we're talking about here. So in thinking about that, when you do answer these questions, think about what it was that you liked about the story. Did you like that you couldn't put it down? Did you like that it was just so lyrical and beautiful and you got lost in the words and you just wanted to slow the book down and the writing was so beautiful? So think about that when you answer the question. Also, a book you didn't like and why you didn't like that one too, which we can use again to eliminate some books for you. And then we ask about particular genres that you like. So maybe you like graphic novels or mystery or fiction or science fiction. And if you have, this is a check all that applies. So if you have a wide range of books that you like to read, feel free to check as many as you can. And tell us a bit about what you're looking for in your next book. So you might be looking for to learn something about, World War II, but you want to read a fictional book about World War II. You don't really want to read a history textbook. You might be interested in a fun summer beach read that you can read in a weekend, that you can sort of take on vacation and not have to think too much about. You might be looking for a few books that you can suggest to your book club outside of books that you guys normally read. So think about answering that question a little bit. What reading level are you looking for? You can ask for book recommendations for adults, young adults, teens, and also children. So if you want to ask for books for your kids, this is another great way too, especially those middle school readers who are good readers. Probably maybe if their reading level is a little bit ahead of the content level, this can be a really great way to get a personalized reading recommendation. And then in what format would you like your books? And you can access books in the library, as you know, through contactless pickup. If they're available in Winchester, you can pick them up in Winchester. Just put a hold online and we'll contact you when they're available. You can also request audiobooks, ebooks, books on CD, large print books too, don't forget about that. So I encourage you to go to the website under our services, reading recommendations, and check this out. It's a great way for the librarians to stay engaged in what you're reading. You're also going to find over time, as you come into the library, you may find a particular librarian who's read a lot of the books that you like. Like if you are a big into story character-driven books, you might connect with one librarian who reads that way too. If there's another librarian who really is more into setting, you might find someone who can connect with you that way. And then you might find a great back and forth of book recommendations that way. The other thing I want to mention is that not every book recommendation is going to be a great one, and not everything that anyone recommends to you is going to be a hit. And in that case, let us know too. If we are recommending books that are missing their mark, we want to know so that we can move away from whatever trend we've started recommending and get on to other things. And also, this has been told to me, and I think I mentioned it last week, it's okay to quit a book. If you give your book, I'd say 50 or 75 pages, and you're just not into it, there are so many books to read. You do not need to waste your hours reading a book you don't love. Books are meant to be enjoyable. They're meant to be an escape. They're meant to be fun. They're meant to help you learn. They're meant to help you get lost and meet new people and go to new places. And if you're into a book that you're just not getting anything from, then I would say put it away and try something else. So thanks for joining me today. I'm just going to go over a few calendar items in our going on in the library this week, because I like to end that way. So you remember to check the website at winpublib.org. This week there's a drop-in book discussion group. They're probably discussing, they're talking about The Other Side of the Bridge by Cameron Wright. So you probably needed to have already read that book. We've got teen game night on Wednesday night at 7 with Amanda. That is Wednesday, yes. Our librarian Paula is doing an armchair travel book chat at 4 o'clock on Thursday, which should be a lot of fun, because I think armchair traveling is what most of us are going to be doing this summer, as opposed to getting in the car or getting on a plane and doing real traveling. And then there's a cooking club Friday night dinner on Friday at 5:30. So check that out. Thanks for joining me. Keep reading, and I'll see you next week.